In 1929, a delegation arrived in Rome to meet Italy's Prime Minister, Benito Mussolini. Their leader that day was Ettore Ovazza, a wealthy Turin banker who was immensely proud to meet Mussolini.
He is serene. Seated at his desk, he motions to us to advance. It was the first time I was to see the face of Il Duce up close.
Ovazza was a fervent supporter of the fascists, but he was also a prominent Jew.
On hearing of my affirmation for the unshakable loyalty of Italian Jews to the fatherland, His Excellency Mussolini looks me straight in the eye and says with a voice that penetrates straight down to my heart, I have never doubted it.
In gamba. Grazie.
What these men have in common is a dream of a greater nation. But the dream will not become reality, and instead Mussolini and his fascist movement will bring about Italy's darkest hour. Mussolini will eventually betray his country, his family, and the man that greets him so warmly that day. For the first time, we reveal the remarkable story of Italian fascism and the extraordinary and tragic tale of the fascist Jews. A story of a disastrous pact with Nazi Germany that would lead to world war and the deaths of 55 million people. A story told for the first time in color. Fascism grew out of the bloody battlefields of the First World War. Austrian forces inflicted a heavy defeat on Italy at the Battle of Caporetto in 1917. Over 500,000 Italian soldiers surrendered or fled. The Italians were forced into a humiliating retreat. Among them was the Turin banker, Lieutenant Ettore Ovazza. After the battle, he was overcome by shame.
My attendant came along beside me, weeping, and asked me, "Where are we going, Lieutenant, sir?" My jaw tightened, and I broke out in tears, and so we retreated.
The war had been a disaster for Italy. Even eventual victory in 1918 brought only muted celebrations. Italy did not gain its expected spoils of war, and the mood of the nation was one of anger and despair. And everywhere was a looming fear of revolution. Only a few years earlier, the Russian government had been overthrown by revolutionary socialists, and the zeal of rebellion was now running through Italy. Strikes and demonstrations were threatening to paralyze the country. In Turin, Ettore Ovazza looked out on the city he loved and was enraged by what he saw. He saw not the disciplined society he desired, but the potential horror of a communist revolution. In the city streets below, there was near insurrection, with riots and looting. The middle classes feared their property would be seized. Ettore Ovazza feared revolutionaries would also rip apart the nation he loved. He wrote in his diary,
In the nation, political hatred spread like wildfire. The young returning home, proud of having fought with honor, many with their brave bodies wounded, were downcast and alone. This cry of anguish was heard by a man who was worthy of it, by Benito Mussolini.
From an early age, Mussolini had politics thrust on him. He was born in 1883 in Romagna, in northeast Italy, an area known for its passionate left-wing politics. His mother was a schoolteacher, his father a socialist blacksmith. At school, he was a violent bully. He was even expelled for stabbing a fellow pupil. He became a schoolteacher But despite his tough reputation, he was sacked for failing to control his class. He volunteered when Italy joined the war in 1915. He fought at the front, but was seriously wounded in a training exercise. But his bitter experience of Italy's humiliation in the First World War turned Mussolini into a fervent nationalist. What he believed Italy needed now was a new political movement, one that was not afraid to use violence to achieve its aims. After the humiliation of the First World War, Italy was in political turmoil. On March the 23rd, 1919, Benito Mussolini and 200 supporters, many disillusioned former soldiers, gathered in the Piazza San Sepolcro in Milan. They formed a new nationalist movement, Fasci Italiani di Combattimento. Fascio, meaning bundle or bunch, indicated strength through unity, but combattimento, or fighting, showed the aggressive intent of the movement from the start. The black shirt became the iconic symbol of fascism. It summed up everything the movement wanted to represent: uniformity, youth, action, glamour, violence, and death. At a veterans' meeting in Turin, Ettore Ovazza eagerly joined the black shirts.
And Ettore Ovazza enters the fascist movement as part of a movement of veterans who are getting together and asking themselves, how can we prevent these terrible things that are happening from destroying the country we've been fighting to help create. And so he was a natural recruit for the fascist movement.
It was not at all unusual for Jews like Ettore Ovazza and his family to be fascists. The fascists, unlike the Nazis, were not anti-Semitic. 1 in 3 Italian Jews later joined the fascist party, and Mussolini's mistress was Jewish. They were attracted to fascism because Jews had been freed from the ghettos and given full equality by the nationalist government when Italy was unified in 1870. Now, as a black shirt, Ettore Ovazza supported the fascist attack on those who seemed to be destroying the country he loved. The black shirts saw themselves as the front line against the socialist threat.
You could not really be a regular member, if you were in the right age group, without being part of this militia. Now, in Italy, the black shirts were the basic core membership of the party. This was a kind of special party army or party militia.
Ovazza played his part by helping to destroy trade union offices in Turin. These fascist attacks on socialism often had the open support of the police and army, as the liberal government was seen as too weak to stand up to the communist threat.
But there was also some sympathy from the state, as fascism claimed it wanted to defend the state, bourgeois society, property, and patriotic values, all those values that socialism deplored.
The strongholds of this uncompromising fascism were in the cities of central and northern Italy. The motto of the black shirts was "Me ne frego," I do not give a damn. They considered life cheap, just as it had been in the trenches. In Lombardy in December 1921, one of the most senior socialist leaders was kidnapped and beaten to death. Women and children were forced to watch, to learn the fate of those who opposed fascism. The local fascist bosses were not concerned with parliamentary procedures. They believed socialism could only be eradicated by force. The fascists didn't defeat the socialist councils in elections. They simply stormed the town halls.
Socialists have lost control of the town hall forever.
The fascist takeovers had a dramatic impact. By the end of 1921, the party had grown from 20,000 to over 200,000 members. And it tasted electoral success too. 38 fascists, including Mussolini, were elected to parliament. Fascist support was surprisingly widespread. The socialists were beaten, the government was weak, and the army sympathetic. Mussolini realized he had an historic opportunity to strike. He decided to organize a show of strength against a liberal government in a mass march on Rome. 25,000 black shirts set off for the Italian capital, demanding power. It was an impressive show of strength. Fascism could still have been stopped, but the king, Victor Emmanuel, refused to call out the army to halt the march. The Russian Revolution and the execution of the Tsar had shocked the king. He chose the lesser of two evils and asked Mussolini to head a new coalition government.
He'd seen the moderate political parties, the regular parliamentary and more democratic parties, divided, relatively impotent, unable to cope with the situation in Italy. Therefore, what the king was doing in October 1922 was simply making the leader of the most vigorous and dynamic new political movement parliamentary prime minister of a coalition government.
The Italian government had backed down in the face of fascist violence. Though Mussolini led a constitutional government, and there were only 3 fascists in the cabinet, he ensured that he could rule by decree for the first year, and that he was in charge of all of Italy's police forces. The king had inadvertently opened the way to a full fascist state under Mussolini's leadership. The fascists moved quickly and ruthlessly against their political enemies. But Mussolini nearly threw it all away. One brazen act of violence went too far, even in the eyes of many fascists. In June 1924, the body of one of Mussolini's leading opponents, socialist deputy Giacomo Matteotti, was discovered in woods outside Rome. His murder had been arranged by Mussolini's close aides. This was a major atrocity. Liberal parliamentarian Giovanni Amendola launched stinging attacks on fascism in his newspaper Il Mondo.
39 million Italians are kneeling along the path of Matteotti from the site of his martyrdom to his final resting place. And today they will rise to defend those ideals that factions and tyranny cannot kill, but only strengthen and glorify.
The first 6 months after Matteotti was murdered in June of 1924 were a very difficult period for Mussolini. Several fascists had deserted him, public opinion was very volatile. There was a real fear that he would be overthrown.
Mussolini faced a stark choice: leaving power or stamping out all remaining dissent once and for all. He chose the latter. On January the 3rd, 1925, Mussolini strode confidently into Parliament. He did not even try to deny his role in Matteotti's death.
I declare before all Italy that I assume full responsibility for what has happened. Italy wants peace and quiet, and to get on with its work. I shall give it all these, if possible in love, but if necessary by force.
The January 1925 speech is the revelatory moment when fascism embarks upon the path towards dictatorship and the totalitarian state. He does it through a series of laws which eliminate the opposition deputies from parliament, which increasingly censors the press, which ultimately in 1926 leads to the dissolution of non-fascist parties and non-fascist trade unions, to the structures being put into place of a police state and a one-party state.
One man did speak out, Amendola. The next day, his newspaper, Il Mondo, said,
"This man, Mussolini, constitutes a pathological case, not foreseen in the Constitution. Everything is subordinated to his mad ambition."
But in the new fascist order, no opposition was tolerated. Amendola was hunted down by the black shirts and viciously beaten.
He was one of the most effective spokesmen for the opposition, and someone who refused to stop.
He was soon silenced, beaten to death. In a final insult, a group of fascists sang cheerfully as they wrecked his house after his death. Mussolini was relieved to be rid of him.
We had only one foe, an inflexible one, Giovanni Battista Amendola. He wanted to overthrow us in order to found a democracy.
Democracy was now finished in Italy. But there was one other body that could stand in his way.
Confidence in the capacity of democracy to protect Italy against communism.
The Pope proclaimed that Mussolini was sent from divine providence. With all opposition effectively silenced, and now with the blessing of the Church, Mussolini had a free hand to start transforming Italy into a great empire to rival that of ancient Rome. His main frustration would be the reality of Italy in the 1920s.
Disorganized, chaotic, unstable. That was a far cry from the Roman Empire, when Italy had been great. And Mussolini looked back to the past and thought, we should be there again.
Once in power, Mussolini started to build the world's first totalitarian state, bending all institutions and people to his will. To build a new type of Italian, Mussolini knew he had to start with the young.
La nostra patria.
In 1925, Mussolini decreed,
"The government demands that the school be inspired by the ideals of fascism."
Adesso bambini leggiamo una poesia di Giuseppe Zucca. Duce chiamaci.
Children were ordered to believe, obey, fight. From the age of 4, they were dragooned into fascist youth organizations, which supplied them with toy guns and black shirts.
Duce, Duce chiamaci.
Duce, Duce chiamaci.
School poems taught children to be ready to fight for fascism whenever the leader needed them.
Schools tried to inculcate patriotism, and they tried to persuade all school children that patriotism and fascism are the same thing.
Fu in pericolo.
Every school children would have to sort of write an essay on why I love Mussolini, or why Mussolini is the greatest man in the 20th century.
Punto. Punto.
Mussolini knew Italy had to be modernized. The fascists introduced a policy of self-sufficiency for agriculture and industry. Massive public works programs to drain marshes and build roads created jobs and were hugely popular. But for Mussolini, their main aim was to prepare the Italian economy for war. The first armed conflict came with a popular rising in Libya, Italy's most important colony.
The Italians had become increasingly ruthless. They'd use mass rapes, desecration of mosques, rounding up civilians into concentration camps, mass starvation, the use of chemical weapons.
100,000 civilians were probably killed between 1929 and 1932 in the pacification of Libya, as it was called. So it's really outside of Italy that fascism showed its particularly violent and brutal side.
Some new European leaders actually admired this brutality. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany and leader of a Nazi party that had modeled itself on many aspects of Mussolini's fascism. Mussolini initially regarded Hitler as a junior partner, but he also saw that with Germany's military strength, the rise of Hitler could be very valuable.
He realized that Hitler's rise to power was going to destabilize the situation in Europe, and this destabilization would begin to open a window of opportunity for Italy's action.
Fascists like the banker Ettore Ovazza felt very differently about the rise of Hitler, fearing that the German leader's blatant anti-Semitism could prove tragic for Italian Jews. Hitler was now in complete control in Germany, and fascist Jews like Ettore Ovazza feared that Hitler's anti-Semitic views could begin to influence the fascist leader, Mussolini. To his relief, Mussolini rejected Hitler's racial theories.
Nothing will make me believe that biologically pure races can be shown to exist today.
To make the difference clear, Mussolini appointed a new propaganda minister to ridicule the Führer. It was his son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano. Just 4 years earlier, Ciano had seemed to make the best career move ever. Aged 27, he married Benito Mussolini's adored daughter, Edda. Ciano hero-worshipped Mussolini, imitating his gestures, his uniforms, and his speech. And he briefed journalists that Hitler was a madman, hell-bent on world war. However, it was not Hitler, but Mussolini who would take the first steps to war. In 1935, his fascist forces invaded Ethiopia, Africa's last independent nation. The Italian invasion force was 600,000 strong. Among them was Mussolini's son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano. He took part in bombing raids on civilians and proudly boasted,
"We have carried out a slaughter."
The way that Mussolini dealt with the Ethiopian question, I think, shows just how calculated and ruthless the man really was.
The Ethiopians fought back desperately.
So then the order was issued by Mussolini in December 1935 to make widespread use of chemical weapons, mustard gas and phosgene, and to use terror tactics en masse.
The Italians even deliberately bombed 19 Red Cross hospitals. Over 250,000 Ethiopians were killed in the fighting.
For a long time, people have tried to conceal that the Ethiopian War and other forms of fascist colonial repression used such ruthless methods. Today, we know this for certain. And I think this has given us more evidence to disprove those who now present fascism as a benevolent, patriotic dictatorship that was polluted and led astray only by the alliance with Germany.
Ethiopia wasn't just about the Italians conquering Ethiopia, it was about them taking on the international order. It was about challenging the predominant Mediterranean powers, the British and the French, for eventual control. That battle, that route to global war, started really in Europe with the Ethiopian crisis of 1935.
Mussolini's aggressive foreign policy was hugely popular at home, but poisoned relations with Britain and France. As European tensions increased, Mussolini promoted Ciano to the key post of Foreign Secretary. But the more time Ciano spent with the Nazis, the more he feared for Italy's future. Ciano started to keep a secret diary, which survives as one of the most remarkable insider accounts in 20th century history. One of the first entries describes Mussolini's visit to Hitler in Berlin in 1937.
Mussolini captured crowds with his magnetism, his voice, and his impetuous youthfulness. Will the solidarity of the regimes be sufficient to keep two nations whose race, culture, religion and tastes are exact opposites really together?
Mussolini was captivated by Hitler's fearless ambition, but wary of his increasing power. Only months after the Berlin visit, the German leader annexed Italy's neighbor Austria. Now in 1938, Hitler gave Czechoslovakia an ultimatum: give up the German-speaking provinces of Sudetenland or face invasion. Hitler's expansionist intentions were becoming clear. Ciano lamented.
Naturally, the objective will be to destroy Czechoslovakia completely. It is war. God protect Italy and the Duce.
Europe held its breath. But at the last moment, Britain begged Mussolini to try to delay the German ultimatum by 24 hours. Hitler told Mussolini he wanted all of the Sudetenland. At the Munich conference, Mussolini presented Hitler's plan as his own. All the leaders signed the Munich agreement that gave Germany the Sudetenland. In return, Hitler promised this was his last territorial demand in Europe. Appeasement had averted the war. For now.
Mussolini won great respect abroad and great popularity at home because he appeared as the peacemaker. But there's a very funny thing about this, that Mussolini himself wasn't at all pleased. He went home muttering, all the crowds are cheering me as the man of peace. But I don't want to be the man of peace. I want to be the man of war.
He knew he needed to be as ruthless as the Nazis if his war aims were to succeed. And he would need his people to become ruthless too.
Italians must learn to be less sympathetic, to become hard, implacable, hateful, masters.
And Hitler's concept of a master race also began to appeal.
Formal laws were passed, effectively disenfranchising the Jewish community in its entirety, kicking them out of public office, kicking Jewish school children out of school, preventing them from attending university, participating in public office.
These laws ended equality for all Jews, even dedicated fascists. Ettore Ovazza had to sell the family bank and resign from the fascist party.
It is the end of a reality, that of our feeling one with the Italian people.
In March 1939, Hitler tore up the Munich Agreement. German troops marched into the rump of Czechoslovakia, the first time they had occupied non-German-speaking territory. Hitler did not warn Mussolini. Only afterwards did he send a note.
The Führer thanks Italy for unshakable Italian support.
Mussolini was in despair.
Every time Hitler grabs a country, he sends me a message.
To keep up with Hitler, Mussolini seized Albania in April 1939. But Italy had now been at war for 10 years, and the strain was beginning to show. The country was bankrupt, military supplies exhausted. Ciano knew the truth.
We must avoid war.
Yet Mussolini ordered his foreign minister Ciano to go to Berlin to sign one of the most disastrous military agreements in history, the Pact of Steel. This required Italy to go to war whenever Germany did. In this agreement, both Germany and Italy promised not to provoke a major European conflict for at least 3 years. But just 3 months later, in Salzburg, Ciano learned directly from Ribbentrop, the Nazi foreign minister, of Hitler's real plans.
He said, gazing at me with his cold metallic eyes,
"We want war. Poland must be invaded, defeated, annihilated, and annexed to the Third Reich in the same fashion as Austria and Czechoslovakia."
After meeting Hitler, Ciano knew for sure that war was inevitable.
he has decided to strike, and strike he will. The fate that might befall us does not interest them in the least.
Ciano felt desperate and powerless.
I returned to Rome completely disgusted with Germany and its leaders. They have betrayed us and lied to us.
But even Ciano could not have guessed what was coming next. Hitler stunned Italy with a political masterstroke. He signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviets, which secretly carved up Poland.
5:25 a.m. Germany attacks Poland. 11 a.m. Britain declares war on Germany.
Ciano struggled hard to keep Mussolini out of the war.
I must fight to the end. Otherwise, it will mean the ruin of the country, the ruin of fascism, and the ruin of the Duce himself.
Mussolini told Ciano,
"The Italians, after having heard my warlike propaganda for 18 years, cannot understand how I can become the herald of peace. Now Europe is in flames."
As the Germans swept across democratic Europe in 1940, Mussolini could restrain himself no longer.
La dichiarazione di guerra!
He declared war on France and Britain. Ciano wrote,
"The adventure begins. May God help Italy."
The most awful, I think the most contemptible reason Mussolini gave for going to war was he said, we need a few thousand dead in order to be able to sit at the conference table. And he thinks that's going to be it.
At Ciano's urging, and as a way of showing his independence, Mussolini decided to seize Greece without informing Hitler.
It was felt that Greece would be a sort of nice, easy target. It was felt the Greek military weren't up to a fight. The Italians were already in Albania, of course. It was simply a job of stepping over the border and Greece would collapse. The Italians began the offensive with very little planning. The weather was appalling.
This was the autumn, during the time of the autumn rains, very bad weather, to move across Balkan mountains into Greece. The result was that the invasion was a complete failure.
The Greek army dug its heels in and fought back and pushed the Italians back into Albania. So it was disastrously ill-conceived and disastrously carried out operation.
Duce.
Mussolini had ignored military advice in ordering the invasion, but he began to blame his soldiers rather than himself.
It is the material that I lack. Even Michelangelo needed marble to make statues. If he had only clay, he would have been nothing more than a potter.
Hitler now had to rush troops to invade the Balkans and Greece. Mussolini was humiliated.
The last thing Mussolini wanted was the Germans anywhere in his sphere of operations whatsoever. So to have to admit defeat was a pretty serious humiliation.
And now he has to play second fiddle to his ally in Nazi Germany. And this gets worse and worse as time goes on. Every place Italy fought virtually was a defeat for Italy.
From now on, Mussolini was completely in Hitler's hands. At 3 a.m. on the 22nd of June, 1941, Mussolini was woken to be told of the German attack on the Soviet Union. There had been no consultation, no forewarning. Mussolini was angry and humiliated.
Even I don't dare disturb my servants at night, but the Germans make me jump out of bed at any hour without the slightest consideration.
Germany was now the absolutely dominant partner in the Axis. Italians felt powerless. The great question in Italy was, who is really the enemy? The popular saying on the streets was, if Britain wins, we lose, but if Germany wins, we are lost. Mussolini shared the very same suspicion. He told Ciano bitterly,
I now seriously ask whether an English victory would not be more desirable for our future than a German victory.
Italian defeats escalated through 1943 with mass surrenders to the Allies in North Africa. When Allied forces landed in Sicily, 12,000 more surrendered without firing a shot. 3 years of military disasters had destroyed the foundations of Italian fascism. Ciano and several other leading fascists began to think the unthinkable. Mussolini would have to go.
I think that before long it will be necessary to place all powers in the hands of the military.
On July 25th, 1943, Mussolini was toppled by a group of fascists, including his son-in-law Ciano. They then meekly handed constitutional power back to the king. The iron dictator was a broken man. At first, there was euphoria. 20 years of fascism seemed to have melted away like snow. The king, Victor Emmanuel III, appointed Marshal Pietro Badoglio, former head of the armed services, as the new prime minister. Badoglio imprisoned Mussolini and also arrested Ciano, who was accused of massive corruption. But the chance to shorten the war and bring peace to Italy was botched.
It turned out to be a fiasco. The Allies and Badoglio could not coordinate what was going to happen. Badoglio and the king pulled up and left Rome in a disaster, disgrace, in flight to go head south.
Before fleeing into the welcoming arms of the Allies, the king announced Italy had changed sides.
And the Italian army and the Italian nation just unraveled overnight, the night of September 8th, which is known also in Italian history as the catastrophe.
Italy was traumatized. Some Italians fought on with the Germans. Others were delighted to join the Allies. Italy now faced the horror of civil war. The German army wasted no time. They moved quickly to occupy the country, and Hitler personally ordered a daring airborne raid to rescue Mussolini from his mountain prison. Hitler installed Mussolini as head of a new fascist government, the Italian Social Republic, or Salo Republic, in German-occupied northern Italy.
It was a mere puppet government. It was a shadow government. That Mussolini technically ran the country, but he was at under orders of the Germans.
As Italy crumbled into chaos and civil war, the Ovazza family fled Turin and headed for a hotel close to the Swiss border. With Ettore were his wife, Nella, son Riccardo, and daughter Elena.
It must have been a tremendously complicated and tragic time for him. Fascism had failed visibly. It had collapsed. Mussolini had been deposed. The dreams of greatness had not measured up to reality.
Riccardo was of military age, and Ettore feared he might be seized. So he found a mountain guide to take Riccardo to Switzerland. Ettore gave his son 50,000 Swiss francs. A few days later, the Ovazzas were enjoying a meal together, believing their son was safe, until Gestapo officers sat down close to them. Tension filled the room. The Gestapo men told Ettore his son had been arrested for smuggling foreign currency across the border. Ettore was made to pay the bill. The three were taken to a school, commandeered by the German SS. Then Ettore Ovazza, the loyal fascist Jew, was led forcibly to the school's basement. Mother and daughter followed. Once inside, all three were brutally executed.
Incredibly, their bodies are then chopped up into pieces. A fire is lit, and they begin to burn these bodies right there in the schoolhouse. It's one of the strange and extraordinary ironies that among the first victims of the German occupation should be one of the most loyal adherents to fascism.
Italy was one of the first, but there would be many others. In September 1943, the Germans occupied Rome. They immediately sent 5,700 Jews to extermination camps. Another 615,000 Italians were sent into forced labor in Germany. Mussolini, who the Nazis had installed as the head of the Salo Republic puppet government in northern Italy, said nothing. This new fascism was more brutal than ever. One of the first to feel its wrath was Ciano. In prison, he awaited the revenge of the father-in-law he had helped to depose. He wrote the last entry in his secret diary. The rest had already been smuggled to Switzerland by his wife.
The policy of Berlin towards Italy was nothing but a web of lies, intrigue and deceit. We were never treated like partners, but always as slaves. Only Mussolini, in his supreme cowardice, could, without reaction, tolerate this and pretend not to see it.
Mussolini then proved Ciano right. This remarkable film of Ciano's execution was shown in cinemas to demonstrate Mussolini's iron resolve and his dedication to Hitler's service. He could have saved his son-in-law, as his daughter begged him to, but that would have betrayed weakness in front of his German masters. By 1944, it was clear the Axis had lost the war. Yet an astonishing 250,000 Italians still joined Mussolini's new Republican Fascist Party, proving fascism's enduring appeal. 40,000 even joined a new armed force called the Black Brigades to fight anti-fascist partisans during 1944 and 45. These partisans, often led by communists, destroyed communications and attacked German troops. In reprisal, the German SS, supported by the Black Brigades, carried out a brutal campaign of suppression which led to the indiscriminate slaughter of thousands of civilians, often women and children.
This was the nastiest part of the entire regime, particularly inside Italy, because there were a lot of political executions, the liquidations of lots of hostages, mass killings, but it was above all a fight for Italy's future.
Of course, partisans saw themselves primarily as seeking to liberate Italy from German occupation, German control. But they also saw it as a war against restored fascism. There was a very real element of using the armed resistance to prepare a post-fascist, a post-war future that perhaps would be communist and revolutionary.
On April 27, 1945, Benito Mussolini, his mistress Clara Petacci, and several fascist leaders were seized by partisans. It was to become an ignominious end for the man who had seen himself as Emperor of Italy.
He was just cut down by a burst of submachine gun fire from this communist partisan leader. Very dramatic, very, very brutal, if you like. And then, of course, his corpse and that of Clara Petacci were hung up feet first in the Piazzale in one of the piazzas of Milan. That may appear very horrible and unjustified, but it has to be said that it was also a sort of symbolic reprisal, because the fascists had previously hung a lot of partisans in that same square.
For a lot of people, they said, well, that sounds like the end of fascism to me. Was it? Well, probably not. I mean, fascism went deeper than just Mussolini and his girlfriend and a few others hanging at the gas station.
Once the Allies held Italy, the West once again saw communism as a far greater threat than Italian fascism. Senior judges, civil servants, military leaders, and even police chiefs who had served under fascism were allowed to slip quietly back into office. And fascism as a political force did not die with Mussolini.
There is still right across Italy, a widespread sense of sympathy for this man, and willingness to accept that maybe there's a bit more to him than just public works programs, road building and draining marshes. There was a bit more to it than that.
Mussolini's belief in fascism, violence and a desire for empire left Italy with a terrible legacy of death and destruction. And together with Hitler, Mussolini plunged Europe into the most destructive war in history and changed the world forever.
CSI next, and a killer who's evaded them all season is about to leave one last shocking miniature calling card. The whole team's on the case in the CSI season finale, next on 5.